5:58 a.m. Headlights pierce the dawn, followed by a deafening crash as mailbox number 4 crumbles to the ground. This time, I'm done patching it up. This time, I'm crafting a trap. Peering out my window, I caught the black SUV peeling away like it owned the street, driven by none other than Rhonda Glass, pearls glinting, pantsuit pristine, the self-anointed queen of the HOA. She has no clue she's tangled with a Hollywood disaster designer who knows how to turn chaos into reality. And let me tell you, in Tinseltown, we don't just build things that break, we build things that fight back with a vengeance. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever dreamed of putting an HOA tyrant in her place, buckle up. This story's about to explode. 3 months ago, I moved into my grandparents' cozy home on Willowbrook Court after inheriting it, stepping into that picture-perfect suburban world where neighbors wave and white picket, fences gleam. The Homeowners Association rules with an iron grip, ensuring every blade of grass bows to their lofty standards, but that's all about to change. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel. For the first month, everything was peaceful. I worked from my garage building props and mechanical effects for movie studios, enjoying the quiet life my grandparents had always loved. Then Rhonda Glass entered my world like a tornado in a pantsuit. The first mailbox incident happened on a Monday morning in early September. I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against concrete and rushed to my window just in time to see a black SUV disappearing around the corner. My brand new mailbox lay twisted on the sidewalk like a pretzel made of aluminum and regret. I figured it was some teenager joyriding or maybe someone texting while driving. These things happen, right? I spent that afternoon at the hardware store, bought a replacement, and installed it myself. No big deal. Rhonda showed up exactly 30 minutes after I finished the installation. She knocked on my door wearing a concerned expression and a shiny gold badge that read HOA President pinned to her blazer like she was the sheriff of suburbia. She was maybe 40 years old with blonde hair that looked like it had been styled by a leaf blower and the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Behind her stood a nervous-looking man with a clipboard who she introduced as Derek Moss, the HOA vice president. "Oh my goodness, Caleb, I heard about your mailbox. What a terrible accident," she said, peering around me to get a look inside my house. "I hope you're not too shaken up. We've never had anything like this happen in our neighborhood before. It's so unusual." The way she said unusual made it sound like I had personally invited chaos into their perfect little world. She asked about my work schedule, whether I had many visitors and if I planned to do any renovations. "We just want to ensure new residents fall in line," she explained with that plastic smile. "Some people fit right in, others need a little guidance." 2 weeks later, it happened again. Same time, same angle, same twisted metal aftermath. I was starting to see a pattern, but I told myself it was just bad luck. Maybe someone had a grudge against the previous homeowner, or perhaps there was a drunk driver who took the same route home from the bar every couple of weeks. I replaced the mailbox again, this time installing a small security camera pointed toward the street. Nothing fancy, just a basic setup to catch whoever was doing this. Rhonda's second visit came with more questions and less fake sympathy. She wanted to know about the camera, asking if I had permission from the HOA to install surveillance equipment. When I told her it was just to protect my property, she nodded slowly like she was filing that information away for later use. Of course, we all want to feel safe. Just remember that cameras can't point toward neighboring properties. Privacy is very important in our community. She handed me a copy of the HOA regulations, a thick booklet that looked like it had been written by lawyers who charged by the word. The third mailbox got destroyed on a crisp October morning. This time, I was ready. I watched from my bedroom window as the black SUV approached at exactly 5:58 a.m., slowed down just enough to line up the shot, then accelerated straight into my mailbox with the precision of a guided missile. The impact sent metal flying across my lawn, and I finally got a clear look at the license plate. It matched perfectly with the SUV parked in the driveway of the biggest house on the street, Rhonda Glass's house. I spent that day reviewing my security footage and taking detailed notes. The pattern was undeniable. Every other Monday, same time, same deliberate targeting. This wasn't random vandalism or drunk driving. This was personal, systematic harassment disguised as accidents. But why? I barely knew the woman. We'd had maybe 3 conversations, all of them perfectly polite. Then it hit me like a ton of suburban bricks. In our first conversation, Rhonda had asked if I was single, mentioned a coffee shop she liked, and suggested we get to know each other better. I had politely declined, explaining that I was focused on work and getting settled. Her smile had flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage. When Rhonda came by after the third incident, I was watching her carefully. She examined the wreckage with the enthusiasm of an art critic studying a masterpiece, taking photos from multiple angles for the HOA records. She mentioned how these accidents seemed to happen only to my mailbox, never anyone else's, and suggested that maybe I should consider moving it to a safer location. When I pointed out that the mailbox was exactly where the previous owners had placed it for 30 years without incident, she just shrugged. "Sometimes change brings unforeseen consequences," she said, and walked away. That night, I sat in my garage workshop, surrounded by the tools and materials of my trade. In Hollywood, we build things that look real but break apart safely for stunts. We also build things that look fragile but are strong enough to survive explosions. As I stared at the pile of mailbox debris in the corner, I decided it was time to apply my professional skills to a personal problem. Rhonda Glass wanted to play demolition derby with my property. Fine. But she was about to learn that some things hit back harder than expected. I picked up that black paint chip I'd found embedded in the aluminum and held it to the light. Perfect match to her SUV's bumper. That night, I opened my laptop and started designing. Not a mailbox, a mousetrap. Monday morning, 5:58 a.m. I stood at my bedroom window with coffee in hand, watching Rhonda's black SUV approach like clockwork. She had no idea I was expecting her this time, no clue that I'd been documenting every single one of her accidents with multiple camera angles. The impact played out exactly as I'd predicted. Deliberate approach, brief pause to line up the shot, then full acceleration into mailbox number 5. The sound of crushing metal echoed through the sleeping neighborhood, and I watched her SUV back away from the scene like a hit-and-run driver fleeing the crime. But this time was different. This time, I had everything on video. Crystal-clear footage of Rhonda Glass, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator, deliberately destroying my property with the precision of someone who'd done this before a lot. I had her license plate, her face behind the windshield, and the unmistakable body language of someone who thought they were untouchable. She was about to learn how wrong she was. 30 minutes later, right on schedule, she knocked on my door. This time, she didn't bother bringing Derek or wearing her concerned citizen mask. She stood on my porch like she owned the place, that gold HOA badge glinting in the morning sun, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Caleb, honey, we need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. "This situation with your mailbox is becoming quite concerning. Concerning how? I asked, genuinely curious to see where this was going. She settled herself on my couch like she was holding court, smoothing her blazer and fixing me with the kind of stare that probably worked on the previous victims. Well, sweetie, this neighborhood has standards, certain expectations. Some neighbors adapt, but others require correction. Her voice carried the tone of someone used to being obeyed without question. She asked about my work schedule with the persistence of someone conducting an interrogation. Did I work from home? How often did I have deliveries? Were clients coming to the house? Did I understand that home-based businesses required special permits? The thing is, Caleb, Derek and I have responsibilities to this community. We keep this place nice and orderly, safe for families. We can't have residents who don't respect the rules we've all agreed to follow. I watched her perform this little speech, recognizing it for what it was, a threat wrapped in suburban politeness. She was establishing dominance, marking territory, letting me know that my peaceful existence in my grandparents' house depended entirely on her approval. The woman had elevated HOA tyranny to an art form, and she was proud of it, but she had no idea she was threatening someone who spent his days building traps for movie villains. When she finished her monologue about community standards and mutual respect, I nodded thoughtfully. You know what, Rhonda? You're absolutely right. Standards are important. Consistency matters. People should get exactly what they deserve. Something in my tone made her pause, but she recovered quickly, flashing that plastic smile and standing up to leave. I'm so glad we understand each other, she said, heading for the door. Oh, and Caleb, you might want to consider moving that mailbox to a safer location. These accidents seem to happen only to yours, and we wouldn't want someone to get hurt. The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She was openly admitting to the destruction while simultaneously threatening to escalate if I didn't comply with her unstated demands. After she left, I spent the morning reviewing the HOA regulations she'd given me. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic language designed to give the board unlimited power over residents' lives. Vague phrases like community standards and aesthetic. Harmony could be interpreted any way the leadership wanted. Grass couldn't exceed 3 in height. Paint colors had to be approved neutral tones. No unauthorized signage, no modifications without permission, no activities that might disturb the peaceful enjoyment of others. I called my neighbor, Betty Chambers, the 70-year-old widow who lived next door and had become my unofficial guide to neighborhood politics. Oh, honey, she said, when I told her about my conversation with Rhonda. You need to be careful. That woman has forced 3 families to move away in the past 2 years. The Johnsons, the Rodriguez family, and those nice young people with the twin babies. She finds violations everywhere, stacks up the fines until people can't afford to stay. Betty invited me over for coffee and showed me her own collection of violation notices, 23 of them, each for increasingly ridiculous infractions. Grass allegedly too tall, measured to fractions of inches. Garden flowers supposedly non-compliant. Species. Her American flag was apparently displayed improperly. Each violation came with fines ranging from $75 to $300, and they accumulated faster than anyone could realistically address them. She does it to anyone who doesn't immediately bow down to her authority, Betty explained, pulling out a folder, thick with documentation. New residents get tested first. If you pass the submission test, she leaves you alone. If you show any sign of independence or backbone, she destroys you systematically until you have no choice but to leave. She showed me photos of the other targeted families, all of whom had committed the crime of questioning Rhonda's authority in some small way. That afternoon, Rhonda made her first official move against me. Derek Moss appeared at my door with a clipboard and that same nervous expression he always wore around his boss. He handed me a yellow violation notice written in formal bureaucratic language that boiled down to, my grass was 3.2 in tall instead of the regulation 3 in maximum. The fine was $75, payable within 48 hours. I measured my grass with a ruler that evening and found it was exactly the same height as every other lawn on the street, but only mine had received a violation. When I walked around the neighborhood taking photos for comparison, I noticed Rhonda watching me from her window, probably planning her next move in this bizarre game of suburban chess. The violation notice was printed on bright yellow paper and posted prominently on my front door like some medieval decree announcing my crimes to the entire neighborhood. Other residents walked by without making eye contact, probably grateful that they weren't the current target of Rhonda's attention. The message was clear: comply or be destroyed. That night, I sat in my workshop, staring at the growing pile of mailbox debris and thinking about what Betty had told me. 3 families forced out of their homes by a woman drunk on the tiny bit of power that came with an HOA presidency. How many more would follow if someone didn't stand up to her? How many neighbors were living in fear, walking on eggshells, afraid to plant the wrong flowers or paint their shutters the wrong shade of white? Watching Rhonda nail that yellow paper to my door like some medieval decree, I finally got it. This isn't about mailboxes, this is about control, and she just picked the wrong guy to control. The yellow papers started appearing on my door like clockwork. Every Tuesday morning, Derek Moss would show up with his clipboard and nervous smile, posting another violation notice while Rhonda supervised from her SUV parked across the street. It was psychological warfare disguised as municipal bureaucracy, and they had turned it into a science. By the end of week 2, my front door looked like a crime scene bulletin board. 5 violation slips in one morning: illegal paint, grass, 0.2 in too high, aggressive parking posture, suspicious tool usage, and the classic failure to comply with community aesthetics. Rhonda had stopped pretending. This was a seed. By week 3, they were getting creative. Vehicle positioning creates sightline obstruction for pedestrian safety. My car parked legally in my own driveway, exactly where my grandparents had parked. Theirs for 30 years was suddenly a hazard to the community. $200. Then came excessive noise during permitted hours because I used power tools in my garage workshop during the clearly designated time frame for such activity, $300. The noise complaint was particularly impressive since I had been building a whisper-quiet jewelry box for romantic comedy when Derek knocked on my door. I started documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone who builds special effects for a living. Photos, timestamps, measurements, recordings. I had comparison shots showing my grass was identical to my neighbor's. Paint samples proving my white was exactly the same white as approved houses. D-cell readings from my workshop that were quieter than a normal conversation. None of it mattered. Rhonda had weaponized the HOA regulations into a personal destruction system, and she was just getting started. The psychological pressure was remarkable in its efficiency. Every morning, I'd check my front door to see if a new yellow notice had appeared overnight like some kind of bureaucratic scarlet letter. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact when they walked past, probably grateful they weren't in Rhonda's crosshairs, but also afraid that showing me any support might make them the next target. The isolation was deliberate and effective. Betty Chambers slipped me a note one afternoon. She's been driving by your house 6 times a day, taking pictures. She did the same thing to the Martinez family before she forced them out. Be careful. I started keeping track of Rhonda's surveillance schedule and discovered she was treating my house like a military target, documenting every detail, looking for new angles of attack. My first attempt at fighting back was subtle and technically legal. I installed a sign in my front yard that read, area under HOA surveillance with official-looking symbols and small print about monitoring equipment. It was factually accurate, aesthetically neutral, and completely within the regulations I had studied cover to cover. Rhonda's reaction was swift and nuclear. Derek appeared at my door within 2 hours, sweating more than usual and clutching a violation notice that was practically smoking. Unauthorized signage displaying non-approved messaging creates community discord. $500. When I protested that the sign met all the stated requirements, Derek actually looked sorry for me. Rhonda says the intent is clearly confrontational, which violates the community harmony clause. That evening, Rhonda called me directly for the first time. Her voice was ice-cold professional with an undertone of barely controlled fury. "Caleb, sweetie, I think we need to clarify something. This community has rules for a reason. When residents decide they're smarter than the system, when they think they can outsmart people who've been maintaining these standards for years, well, that's when things get complicated." She paused long enough for the threat to sink in. "Your current violation total is $1,200. That might seem like a lot, but trust me, it can get much higher if we keep playing these little games." I hung up and did some math. In 3 weeks, Rhonda had manufactured over $1,000 in fines for violations that existed only in her imagination. At this rate, she'd have grounds to place a lien on my house within 2 months. I called Betty to ask about the families who'd been forced out, and the story was always the same. Escalating violations, mounting fines, impossible deadlines, until selling the house became the only financially viable option. The next morning brought violation number 6, landscaping placement within prohibited setback zone. The memorial flower garden my grandparents had planted 30 years ago was suddenly too close to the street. $750 plus mandatory removal of all non-compliant vegetation within 72 hours. This one hit different. This was personal. I spent that afternoon in the garden my grandparents had lovingly tended, measuring distances and reviewing old property surveys. These weren't just flowers, they were Sundays with Grandma. Bent knees in the dirt, and Grandpa's humming while laying the stepping stones. Watching Rhonda crush them felt like watching memories burn. But Rhonda wasn't interested in history or legality. She was interested in breaking me when Derek came by to deliver violation number 7 the next day, excessive garage utilization for non-residential purposes. I asked him a direct question. "Derek, do you actually believe any of these violations are legitimate?" He looked around nervously as if Rhonda might be hiding in the bushes with a recording device. "Look, man, I just do what she tells me. I need this position on my resume for the city council job I'm applying for. Rhonda has connections. That night, I sat in my workshop calculating the total damage, $1,750 in fines, with more coming every few days. Rhonda had given me 1 week to pay or face escalated enforcement proceedings, which probably meant a lien on the house. She'd done this before, perfected the system, turned it into a machine for crushing anyone who dared to challenge her authority. But she had made one critical mistake. She had no idea who she was dealing with. In my line of work, I don't just build things that break. I build things that look like they'll break, then surprise everyone by being stronger than anyone imagined. And I was about to apply those skills to a very special project. Bearing at $1,500 in fines for having normal grass and white paint, I made a decision. If Rhonda wants to play hardball, fine. But she's about to learn that in my line of work, we specialize in things that hit bad. The memorial garden was my grandparents' pride and joy. Every spring, Grandma would spend hours tending the roses they'd planted together. 30 years of careful cultivation, creating something beautiful for the whole neighborhood to enjoy. Grandpa had laid each stepping stone by hand, creating gentle pathways between the flower beds so visitors could walk through and appreciate the different varieties. It was a testament to their love for each other and their commitment to making their little corner of the world more beautiful. Rhonda destroyed it on a Thursday morning in November. I watched from my kitchen window as she arrived with Derek and tow, both of them carrying measuring devices and clipboards like they were conducting some kind of official survey. She walked straight into the garden wearing her most businesslike expression, pointed at various plants while Derek scribbled notes, then began systematically trampling through the flower beds, not by accident, not due to clumsiness. With deliberate, methodical precision, she crushed the antique roses that had survived 3 decades of Michigan winters. She scattered the memorial stones Grandpa had placed to mark the anniversary of their wedding. She ground daffodil bulbs into the mud with her designer heels, all while Derek documented the property line violations she was allegedly discovering. When I ran outside to confront them, she looked up from the destruction with that same plastic smile she'd worn during our first meeting. "Oh, Caleb, we're just conducting the mandatory inspection I mentioned in your violation notice. These plantings are clearly within the prohibited setback zone, which is a serious safety issue for emergency vehicles." She gestured at the crushed roses like they were toxic waste. "I know it's disappointing, but regulations exist for everyone's protection." The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She was destroying 30 years of love and care while lecturing me about community safety. I knelt among the destroyed flowers, my hands shaking with anger as I picked up pieces of broken memorial stones. That night, I stared at the garden from my window, unable to sleep. I opened a new tab to look up how to forfeit a house to the HOA. I even drafted a resignation letter from the property. I was tired, beaten. Rhonda had not just destroyed a garden, she had ripped out the last piece of home I had left. Then I saw it. Grandpa's old gardening book sitting untouched on the shelf. I opened it to a page, dog-eared and faded, and tucked between 2 brittle leaves was a note in his handwriting. It said that we don't plant roses for today. We plant them so someone else can sit in the shade tomorrow. I sat down on the floor for the first time since this war began. I cried, but not because I lost hope. Because I remembered why I started. "These roses were 30 years old," I said, my voice barely controlled. "My grandparents planted them together. They've been here longer than half the houses in this neighborhood." Rhonda just shrugged, already filling out another violation notice. "Property violations don't have sentimental exceptions, honey. Rules are rules." Derek looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time since I'd met him. He kept glancing at the destroyed garden, then at Rhonda, then back at his clipboard like he was trying to disappear into the paperwork. When I asked him directly if he thought this was necessary, he mumbled something about following established procedures and refused to make eye contact. The man was a coward, but at least he knew what they were doing was wrong. For landscaping violations plus immediate removal of all non-compliant vegetation, Rhonda announced, handing me another yellow notice. "You have 72 hours to clear everything and reseed with approved ground cover. Failure to comply will result in additional fines and possible legal action." She surveyed the destruction with satisfaction, like an artist admiring her masterpiece. That afternoon, Betty Chambers came over with tears in her eyes. She'd watched the whole thing from her window and recorded it on her phone. "Honey, she's gone too far this time. That garden was registered with the Neighborhood Historical Society. Your grandmother gave tours to garden club visitors from 3 different counties. Everyone loved those roses. Betty showed me the video she'd taken, clear footage of Rhonda deliberately destroying plants while claiming to measure property lines. I spent the evening in the ruins of my grandparents' garden trying to salvage what I could. Some of the bulbs might survive if I replanted them quickly. A few rose bushes could potentially be saved if I cut them back severely and hoped for the best. But 30 years of careful cultivation, of shared memories and quiet Sunday mornings spent weeding together was gone forever. Because one woman couldn't tolerate anyone existing outside her control. The violation total had reached $2,300. Rhonda had given me one final ultimatum: pay in full within 7 days or face foreclosure proceedings. She'd done this dance before, knew exactly how to push people past their breaking point, how to make staying fight cost more than leaving quietly. But she had miscalculated badly this time. I called in sick to work and spent the next 3 days in my garage workshop designing something special. Not just a mailbox replacement, but a statement, a line in the sand, a trap disguised as surrender. I sketched designs, calculated load-bearing requirements, ordered materials from suppliers who specialized in Hollywood-grade construction. If Rhonda wanted to escalate this war, I was ready to give her a battle she'd never forget. The neighbors had started avoiding me completely now, too afraid of becoming Rhonda's next target to show any sympathy or support. I couldn't blame them. They'd watched 3 families get destroyed by this woman's systematic harassment campaign. They knew exactly what happened to people who crossed her, and they had families to protect. But their silence was also complicity, and it made Rhonda's power seem absolute. On Sunday evening, I stood in the wreckage of my grandparents' garden and made a promise to their memory. I thought about all the Sunday afternoons we'd spent here together. Grandma teaching me about different rose varieties, while Grandpa explained how proper drainage prevented root rot. They'd built something beautiful that brought joy to an entire community, and Rhonda had destroyed it for no reason other than to demonstrate her power. Betty knocked on my door that night with a plate of homemade cookies and a folder full of documents. "I've been keeping records on Rhonda for 2 years," she said quietly. "Every violation notice, every family she's targeted, every abuse of power. I was waiting for someone brave enough to fight back." She handed me the folder with shaking hands. "That garden meant everything to your grandparents. Don't let her win." Looking at those crushed roses in the moonlight, I made a promise to Grandpa's memory. Rhonda Glass has bullied her last neighbor. Monday morning, her little game ends with a bang she'll never forget. Sunday night became planning time. I spread blueprints across my workbench like a general preparing for battle, calculating stress loads and impact resistance, while the rest of Willowbrook Court slept peacefully. In Hollywood, we build 2 kinds of props: things designed to break spectacularly and things designed to survive explosions. I was about to construct the ultimate example of the second category. The foundation required serious engineering. 4 feet deep, steel-reinforced concrete designed to anchor something much heavier than a typical mailbox. I had to work in sections, during Derek's lunch breaks and Rhonda's afternoon errands, disguising the construction as routine landscaping repairs. My neighbors probably thought I was finally complying with the violation notices, fixing the property line issues by installing new borders. The mailbox looked HOA approved in every way: height, color, placement. I even printed out the local ordinance and checked every measurement twice. On paper, it was perfect. In reality, it was an immovable object waiting for its force. From the outside, it looked exactly like every other mailbox on Willowbrook Court. Standard aluminum construction, regulation height, approved suburban aesthetics. But inside that innocent exterior was a solid steel core anchored to that concrete foundation, with enough strength to stop a small truck. The whole thing was designed to absorb massive impact without showing so much as a scratch. Rhonda's surveillance schedule made the work challenging, but not impossible. She drove by 6 times per day like clockwork, slowing down to photograph any changes to my property. I timed my construction around her pattern, working in my garage during her lunch hour and installing components after dark when she was safely inside, watching her evening television programs. Derek made his daily violation deliveries at precisely 10 a.m., so I scheduled concrete pours for 10:30. A camera system required more subtlety, multiple angles, hidden mounting points, wireless transmission to backup storage locations. I wanted every second of the coming impact documented from different perspectives, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that even Rhonda's creative interpretation skills couldn't dispute. Betty offered to help by positioning additional recording devices from her window, creating a comprehensive surveillance network. By the middle of the week, Rhonda's paranoia was reaching new heights. She'd started making extra drive-bys, sometimes parking across the street for 20 minutes at a time while she studied my house through binoculars. Derek mentioned during one of his violation deliveries that Rhonda was concerned about unauthorized construction activities, but my permits were all in order, and my work was technically just landscaping and mailbox maintenance. The psychological pressure was relentless. New violations appeared daily. Excessive tool usage during restricted hours, unauthorized material storage, construction debris creating visual pollution. Each notice came with escalating fines and shorter deadlines. Rhonda was accelerating her timeline, probably sensing that I was planning something and wanting to crush me before I could implement it. Thursday brought the ultimate insult, a violation for memorial display without proper permits. Apparently, the small stone marker I'd placed in memory of my grandparents' destroyed garden was now a code violation requiring a $300 permit and monthly inspections. The woman had no shame, no limits, no recognition that she was systematically destroying lives for her own entertainment. I installed the final components on Friday night, working by moonlight to position the last hidden cameras and test the wireless transmission systems. The Fortress mailbox looked exactly like its predecessors from the street. Innocent, vulnerable, an easy target for someone drunk on suburban power. But beneath that deceptive exterior lay enough engineering to survive a direct hit from Rhonda's oversized SUV. Betty kept watch during the installation, occasionally signaling when car headlights approached. She'd become my unofficial partner in this operation, the only neighbor brave enough to actively support the resistance against Rhonda's tyranny. "That woman has terrorized this community for too long," she whispered, as I made final adjustments to the camera angles. Someone needs to show her that actions have consequences. Saturday morning brought Rhonda's final ultimatum, delivered personally instead of through Derek's usual nervous visits. She stood on my porch wearing her most official expression, that gold HOA badge catching the morning sunlight like a sheriff's star. "Caleb, sweetie, your current violation total is $3,200. Payment is due by Monday morning, or we initiate foreclosure proceedings. I do hope you'll make the sensible choice." I looked at her standing there in front of the house my grandparents had loved, surrounded by the ruins of their memorial garden, threatening to take away everything they'd worked for because I'd refused to submit to her authority. "You know what, Rhonda? I think Monday morning is going to be very educational for both of us." Something in my tone made her pause, but she recovered quickly with that plastic smile. "I'm glad you're finally ready to be reasonable," she said, turning to leave. "Just remember, this community has standards for a reason. People who can't adapt to our way of life usually find it easier to relocate somewhere more suitable to their temperament." The casual arrogance was breathtaking. She genuinely believed she was untouchable, that her little kingdom would last forever. Sunday night, 11:47 p.m., the trap is set. Tomorrow at 5:58 a.m., Rhonda Glass drives into her destiny. And this time, the whole neighborhood will be watching when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. Monday morning, 5:57 a.m. I stood at my bedroom window with coffee in one hand and my phone recording in the other, watching the quiet street that was about to become a crime scene. Betty was positioned at her window across the way, her own recording device ready and her internet live stream already running for the 12 followers she'd managed to gather over the weekend. The hidden cameras were armed and waiting, motion sensors primed to capture every detail of what was about to unfold. The sound came first, that familiar rumble of Rhonda's oversized SUV engine growing louder as she approached her target. Right, on schedule, exactly as she had for the past 2 months, driving toward my mailbox with the confidence of someone who believed herself absolutely untouchable. She slowed slightly as she approached, lining up her shot with practiced precision, then accelerated toward the impact point with 25 mph of suburban fury. The collision was spectacular. Physics met engineering in a symphony of twisted metal and exploding safety systems that could be heard 3 blocks away. Rhonda's SUV hit my fortress mailbox with enough force to demolish a normal installation, but instead of the usual crushing satisfaction, she got something completely different. The SUV hit it like a freight train, but the mailbox didn't even flinch. Her car folded around it like it had hit a lamppost made of spite and steel. It didn't bend, shake, or show so much as a scratch. It stood there like a monument to proper construction, while her vehicle folded around it like an accordion made of steel and regret. The hood crumpled instantly, steam erupting from the destroyed radiator as airbags exploded throughout the passenger compartment. The impact drove the engine block backward into the firewall, transforming Rhonda's weapon of suburban terrorism into a smoking pile of automotive scrap metal. Glass scattered across the asphalt like diamonds, and various fluids began pooling beneath the wreckage and spreading rainbows of mechanical failure. Rhonda sat motionless, airbag in her face, hair-eeky static shock. Behind her, the fortress mailbox gleamed. In the sunrise, unbothered, undefeated, and completely legal. Through her shattered windshield, she stared at my mailbox with an expression of pure disbelief, as if the fundamental laws of physics had personally betrayed her. The fortress stood pristine and unmarked, its aluminum exterior gleaming in the morning sunlight, like it was posing for a victory photograph. I walked outside calmly, still recording with my phone, savoring every second of this perfect reversal. Behind me, Betty emerged from her house, announcing to her livestream audience that they were witnessing justice in real time and asking people to share the video with anyone who'd ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president. Within minutes, neighbors began appearing on their porches and driveways, phones in hand, documenting the scene. "What? How is this possible?" Rhonda stammered as she struggled out of her destroyed vehicle. "This mailbox is illegal. You set me up. This is a trap." Her voice cracked with panic as she realized that dozens of people were recording her meltdown from every possible angle. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood was finally experiencing consequences for her actions, and she clearly had no idea how to handle it. "Actually, Rhonda, it's just really well built," I replied calmly, still recording as she stood among the wreckage of her intimidation campaign. "I use proper engineering principles and quality materials, standards." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She'd spent months lecturing me about community standards while systematically violating every standard of human decency. Derek arrived just as Rhonda was reaching peak meltdown mode, took one look at the scene, and immediately started walking in the opposite direction. The man wasn't brave, But he wasn't stupid either. He could read the writing on the wall, and that writing said his association with Rhonda's reign of terror was about to become a serious liability. Within hours, he'd resign from the HOA board and deny ever supporting her harassment campaigns. "Everyone stop recording!" Rhonda shrieked, spinning in circles as she tried to face all the cameras simultaneously. "This is private property. You can't film me without permission, but we were on a public street documenting what appeared to be a traffic accident, and her demands only made her look more unhinged. Several neighbors who'd never spoken to me before approached to offer witness statements and additional video footage. Betty's live stream was attracting viewers faster than she could count them. Comments were flooding in from people sharing their own HOA horror stories, praising the Mailbox justice and asking for technical specifications on fortress construction. The hashtag Mailbox Revenge started trending in our metropolitan area within the first hour, and local news stations began reaching out for interviews. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Multiple camera angles showing deliberate targeting, systematic property destruction, and now the spectacular consequences of Rhonda's own actions. She'd created a perfect documentation of her own downfall, complete with witnesses, recordings, and a smoking pile of automotive evidence that no amount of creative interpretation could explain away. "You know what, Rhonda?" I said, as emergency responders began arriving to deal with the wreckage. "I never wanted this war. I just wanted to live peacefully in my grandparents' house. You started this with the first mailbox. I'm just finishing it." The woman who destroyed 30-year-old memorial gardens and forced families from their homes was finally facing someone who refused to be intimidated. As the tow truck hooked up Rhonda's crumpled SUV, I realized something beautiful. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was completely silent. No engine noise, no threats, no fear, just the sound of justice being served with a side of twisted metal. The video went viral within 6 hours. Betty's live stream, my phone footage, and recordings from a dozen neighbors created a comprehensive documentary of Rhonda's spectacular downfall that spread across social media like wildfire. Comments poured in from people sharing their own HOA horror stories, celebrating mailbox justice, and asking for detailed construction plans. Local news stations picked up the story by evening, running segments titled HOA President's Mailbox Meltdown and Suburban Justice Served. Rhonda's insurance company denied her claim within 48 hours. Deliberately ramming a vehicle into a stationary object wasn't covered under any policy they'd ever written, and the video evidence made their decision appealingly simple. She was facing the total loss of her vehicle, medical bills from airbags, injuries, and the growing prospect of civil lawsuits from every family she'd previously harassed. Her kingdom was crumbling faster than her SUV's front end. The neighborhood emergency meeting was called for a Friday evening, and the community center hadn't seen crowds like this since the 1980s. Residents who'd been terrorized into silence for years finally felt safe to speak publicly about Rhonda's systematic abuse of power. Betty presented her carefully documented evidence of harassment campaigns, showing the pattern of targeted violations, escalating fines, and forced relocations that had driven out 3 previous families. "He fined us $2,000 for having the wrong mailbox color," testified the Williams family, who'd painted their mailbox the exact same blue as 4 other houses on their street. When we showed her the identical colors, she said ours was aggressively blue and threatened to foreclose if we didn't pay within a week. Similar stories emerged from every corner of the room, painting a picture of systematic intimidation disguised as community governance. The Martinez family had been forced to cut down a 50-year-old oak tree because Rhonda claimed it violated sightline regulations, despite the fact that it had been there decades before the subdivision existed. The Johnsons had lost their house, over alleged excessive children's noise violations when their twin toddlers played in their own backyard during permitted hours. Every story followed the same pattern: manufactured violations, escalating pressure, and economic destruction. Rhonda made one final attempt to maintain control, arriving at the meeting with a briefcase full of legal documents and threats. She claimed I'd built an illegal booby trap designed to cause her harm, demanding investigations into conspiracy charges and property damage claims. Her performance was epic in its desperation, but the room full of her former victims wasn't buying it anymore. They'd seen behind the curtain, and the wizard was just a petty tyrant with a gold bad. The vote of no confidence was unanimous. 47 households voted to immediately remove Rhonda from all HOA positions, revoke her authority to issue violations, and install new leadership dedicated to actual community service instead of personal power trips. Derek had already resigned via email, citing philosophical differences with current board direction and a sudden need to focus on his city council campaign. Betty Chambers was elected as the new HOA president by acclamation, promising to run the organization according to common sense principles and genuine community benefit. Her first official act was revoking every violation notice Rhonda had issued in the past 2 years, cancelling all associated fines and establishing an appeals process for residents who felt unfairly targeted. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Within a month, Rhonda's house went on the market. She couldn't afford to stay without a vehicle, and the social isolation was complete. Former allies distanced themselves, neighbors crossed the street to avoid her, and the local grocery store had banned her after she screamed at teenage employees about conspiracy theories. She'd become a pariah in the community she'd once ruled through fear. That mailbox, it's more than steel now. It's proof that when you plant roots deep and build strong, no tyrant, no matter how golden her badge, can uproot what's right. Children asked their parents about the famous mailbox that fought back, and new residents specifically requested tours of the engineering marvel that had ended a tyrant's reign. I started getting calls from other neighborhoods asking for consultation on defensive landscaping and anti-car infrastructure. Apparently my story had inspired a movement. 6 months later, I was working in my rebuilt memorial garden when a young family with 2 small children knocked on my door. They just moved into Rhonda's old house and wanted to meet the neighborhood legend who'd liberated their new community from suburban tyranny. Their kids immediately gravitated toward the fortress mailbox, asking technical questions about construction, methods, and impact resistance. "Can you teach us how to build one?" the father asked, gesturing toward my engineering masterpiece. Our last neighborhood had an HOA president who made Rhonda look reasonable, and we want to be prepared if it happens again. I realized that Rhonda's legacy wouldn't be the fear and intimidation she'd preferred, but rather a community educated about standing up to bullies and building things strong enough to survive their attacks. Betty's new HOA board focused on actual community improvement, organizing block parties, maintaining common areas, and mediating neighbor disputes with common sense instead of violation notices. Property values increased for the first time in 3 years. Families with children started moving in instead of fleeing, and Willowbrook Court became the kind of neighborhood my grandparents had always envisioned. I still start most mornings with coffee at my bedroom window. But now I'm watching children walk to school safely instead of monitoring for incoming suburban warfare. The memorial garden blooms again each spring, visited by neighbors who remember my grandparents and appreciate the story of resilience it represents. Sometimes justice doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it arrives with the sweet sound of crumpling metal and the sight of a bully finally getting exactly what they deserve. The fortress mailbox stands guard over our peaceful street, gleaming in the morning sunlight. A permanent reminder that bullies only stay in power as long as good people remain silent. And in our neighborhood, the age of silence is officially over. Drop your stories in the comments if you've ever dealt with a neighborhood tyrant. And remember, sometimes the best defense is just building something stronger than the person trying to tear you down.